two-lane traveler, bringing you another road tripping video. For today's trip, we're heading to Rugby, Tennessee. Rugby is one of those kinds of places that you'll never ever accidentally drive through and say, "Hey, cool looking place, let's stop and check it out." That's because Rugby isn't on the way to anywhere. If you're on the road to Rugby, it's because you're going to Rugby. My job in this video is to get you on that road. So let's go. Rugby is on the Cumberland Plateau about 50 miles northwest of Knoxville, Tennessee. It's less than a square mile in size, but overlaps two counties, Morgan and Scott. As you enter the village, your first stop should be the visitor center. Here you can pick up information about the local places and watch a 22-minute video that describes its story. You should watch the video. It's interesting and well done. But for now, here's the short version. In 1880, British author and social reformer Thomas Hughes had grandiose ideas about creating a utopian society within the context of Christian socialism. He had his mind set on developing a community where Rugby, Tennessee now sits. He had to target his fellow Brits who were well off enough financially to be able to move to America, but not so well off that they wouldn't want to. He fell upon the idea of second sons of the upper class as his target. What are second sons? Primogeniture was still practiced among the English elite, as it had been for centuries. The idea means that if you're the eldest son of the family, you inherit virtually the entire estate. Your siblings, on the other hand, receive a smaller lump sum of cash or an allowance and are sent packing. This was a great way to keep the landed gentry in Great Britain intact, but it wasn't so great if you weren't the eldest son. Let's not even get into what happens if you're a daughter. Thomas Hughes convinced quite a few of these second sons who had limited prospects in Great Britain to move to Tennessee, build a house, and farm the land. Beginning in 1880, things started happening, and many men, and in some cases their families, relocated to what was to become Rugby. Unfortunately, things didn't work out well, as is often the case in utopian societies. A bitter cold 1880 winter, followed by a typhoid epidemic in 1881, made things difficult. Add to this the fact that most of the upper-class second sons didn't particularly care for the hard work that farming entailed, and it resulted in most people not staying for very long before moving on. By the mid-1880s, the population peaked at about 300 to 350 people, then slowly declined. By 1900, there were about 125 residents in Rugby. Over the next 50 to 60 years, the remaining descendants of the early settlers stayed and cared for their homes, cemeteries, and public buildings. Some, like Will and Sarah Walton, went to extensive lengths to protect Rugby's history. In 1966, a 16-year-old boy from a nearby town named Brian Stagg discovered Rugby and quickly became enamored with it. He hoped to restore and preserve the entire village. Along with local residents and others, the Rugby Restoration Association was organized that year, and in 1972, Rugby was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Since that time, many buildings have been restored or accurately reconstructed. New homes have also been built following the Victorian aesthetic of the original houses. So that's Rugby's story in a nutshell. The video is actually pretty interesting. Once you watch it, or even if you don't watch it, you can take a guided tour of 4 public buildings. Thomas Hughes' home, Kingston Isle, is right next to the visitor center. Hughes didn't actually live in the home. He didn't even live in Rugby. He lived in England and visited Rugby about once a year for a couple of months. This may have been part of the reason for the failure of utopian Rugby. The house is original and well cared for by the community. It's also part of the ghost tour that I'll tell you about a bit later. On the other side of the visitor center is the schoolhouse. It was built in 1907 after the earlier schoolhouse burned down. The earlier one looked similar, but was 3 stories instead of 2. This schoolhouse has been turned into a small museum. It's on the ghost tour as well. Next to the school is the most impressive building in Rugby. This is the Thomas Hughes Library. It's a lending library that looks virtually identical to the way it looked when it was built in 1882. It includes the same 7,000 books that have been there since the earliest days. Not a single book in the library was published after the 1880s. And only 7 books from the original collection are missing. Make that 6. In December 2023, a book was purchased at a garage sale and returned to the library after having been missing for 141 years. The book is Diamonds and Rubies, or The Home of Santa Claus, written by Susie M. Waring, published in 1870. It still has the original Hughes Public Library seal from 1882 and the catalog number identifying where it belongs on the shelves. This building is on the ghost tour too. By now you're probably asking yourself why you should do both tours. They're very different, that's why. The buildings are dark, very dark for the ghost tour, so you won't see the same things, and of course, you're not supposed to. The last building on this tour is not on the ghost tour. It's Christ Church Episcopal, and it's right across the street. The church was built in 1887 and held its first service there in October of that year. Prior to that, it held services on the second floor of the schoolhouse, sharing the space with other denominations. The church has painted its original color, and most of the interior is the same. The kneelers have had the padding replaced, and the hanging light fixtures have obviously been electrified, but are otherwise the same. So those are the original buildings you can see on the Visitor Center tour. There are 3 other buildings nearby that are open during the day that are interesting as well. The print shop isn't the original one from Rugby, but it's from the same era. It actually came from the town of Deer Lodge, a short distance away. It was purchased by Historic Rugby in 1978 and moved to its current location. There it was reassembled and outfitted with period-correct printing equipment. A very experienced printer will show you the equipment and explain how the process works. The job is complicated. The type must be set upside down and backwards so that it prints out correctly. It reminds me of the joke about the dancer Ginger Rogers being able to do everything her partner Fred Astaire could do, except she had to do it backwards and in high heels. The next building is an exact replica of the Board of Aid to Land Ownership. This was an important place where lots were bought and sold in 1880 Rugby. Today it has a store inside where local artists have their wares for sale. The Rugby Commissary sits on the foundation of the original commissary of the same name. It sells various goods inside as well. You may also notice a building called the Harrow Road Cafe that's not currently open. It's supposed to be opening soon, but for now there is nowhere in Rugby to eat. Maybe that will be changed by the time you visit. In either case, there's a great option 2.5 miles down the road. The R.M. Brooks store has lots of interesting things for sale and very tasty food to eat, like great burgers, sandwiches, fried pies, milkshakes, and smoothies. The food is surprisingly inexpensive, too. Definitely visit this place whether you're hungry or not, but be aware that their hours are very limited. Breakfast is Saturday only, and the other days are something like 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'm not sure if they're closed any days. Your other options are to bring your own food or drive a half hour to another town. There are many other old homes around town. Most have been restored by current or previous owners. I spent 2 nights in the Newberry house and loved it. You can rent a single room or the entire house. Ghosts are supposed to visit this place on occasion, I'm told. On my first night, I had the entire house to myself, and it was quiet and serene. On the second night, I shared the house with some very friendly but living humans. Ghosts had to be searched for elsewhere. Here are some of the other places to check out in Rugby. So the Ghost Tour is coordinated with Historic Rugby, but is put on by an organization called History, Highways, and Haunts. I'll leave a link in the comments section below. The tour guide was flexible and knowledgeable and provided lots of historic information about the Rugby ghosts. I've never been on one of these before, but I had a good time and would do it again. Our tour started in the theater in the visitor center, moved to each of the 3 houses I already mentioned, then went to the Uffington house, which was the home of Thomas Hughes' mother, Margaret. The whole thing lasted 3 hours or so, maybe a little longer. If you're interested in more houses, Beacon Hill is the area where people have built modern houses that look very much like the original historic houses. I think there are 25 or more houses already built there, and it looks like a couple more are in process. Also, the historic cemetery has some interesting people buried there. Margaret Hughes' grave is there. She came to Rugby as an 83-year-old in 1880 and died 7 years later. After her death, her son Thomas Hughes never returned to Rugby. The saddest marker in the cemetery is the grave of 13-year-old Hiram Lowhorn, who was accidentally shot by his cousin. He's supposed to be one of the ghosts around town, but his grave marker is heartbreaking. No parent should have to go through the pain of outliving their child. As you read his headstone, his parents' pain is palpable. Lastly, I want to mention that Rugby is just a great place to come and relax. It's a very quiet place. There isn't any traffic. You can rock on the porch and read a book or take a walk through nature on one of the many hiking trails. Choose your own way to take in all the beauty that surrounds you. So that's Rugby. I hope I've given you enough reasons to visit and explore its unique features. You won't be disappointed if you do. I've included a link to my map of Rugby in the comments section below. It identifies all of the locations shown and talked about in this video. If you have any questions or comments, post them below and I'll respond. Thanks for watching.